LoreWarrior Campaign, 4th Succession War, Draconis Front, Lyran Commonwealth Armed Forces in 3028. In 3022, the Lyran Commonwealth Armed Forces was a military that, though extremely well equipped, seemed mired in inter-service conflicts, in ponderous tactics relying too much on equally ponderous mechs, and in a military bureaucracy thick with redundancies, graft, and self-centered officers. In the next 6 years, the Lyran Commonwealth Armed Forces was transformed into a military machine that surprised the Draconis Combine Mustard Soldiery with a successful offensive. The alliance with the Federated Sons had a great deal to do with the improvement of the LCAF, but just as much of the credit should go to Archon Steiner, who had used the new alliance as a way to improve her military. She manipulated the inevitable comparisons between the two, and soon had most of her troops ready for a change, ready to do anything to avoid embarrassing themselves in front of the Federated Sons. For 6 years, the Archon phased in reforms that removed many incompetent officers from the bureaucracy, making it more efficient and less paper-bound. She and General Edward Regis, commander of the armies, changed the promotion structure to reward skilled officers and innovative tactics. Without question, the most important change that the Archon made was in how the LCAF fought. She revised the curriculums of her military academies, the Neighgoring, Sanglamore and other Lyran academies, though very good schools, focused too much on personal weapons skills and paid too little attention to tactical and organizational concern. Cadets from these schools were excellent marksmen, but on the battlefield they had little sense of what was happening and what to do about it. In 3023, the Archon ordered the schools to pattern their curriculums after the Davion ones. She also published a battlefield guide to the uninitiated, an extremely well-written primer on tactics that had been adopted by the military academies of the Lyran Commonwealth and the Federated Sons. The Archon organized her regiments into regimental combat teams in 3026, and soon her mech regiments were training with infantry, armor, artillery, and fighter units. These new Lyran RCTs copied those of the Federated Sons. The Archon was attempting to get Lyran forces to fight and maneuver as a team instead of blundering into each other as they had done once before. The success of Operation Thor in 3027 proved her right. The Archon also changed the LCAF's arsenal. She ordered some of her mech factories to retool their lines to manufacture lighter, quicker mechs to compensate for her military's overabundance of assault units. As part of this shift, the Archon obtained mech designs that had been unique to the Federated Sons. Defiance Industries began to manufacture Valkyrie and Enforcer battle mechs in 3025, and the company also continued to manufacture the advanced and controversial Hatchetman mech. Instead of dispersing the new mechs to fill vacancies in existing regiments, the Archon gathered the light and medium mechs into companies and appointed the best graduates from her new academies to pilot them. These companies then travelled to the Federated Sons for training at the New Avalon Institute of Science and with elite AFFS units that specialised in swift mech tactics, such as the Eridani Light Horse, the Davion Light Guard, and Team Banzai. After a 6-month tour, the Lyran companies returned to the Commonwealth and were commissioned as Lightning Companies. They were then transferred to the frontline mech regiments to serve as mobile reserve, and by 3028, all but a handful of regiments had Lightning Companies. A secret mech regiment was commissioned in 3025 and remained mysterious until its debut during the war. Rumours abounded that the regiment was made up of women, of ex-Combine warriors, or warriors with Scandinavian heritage, amongst other rumours. All that was known for certain was that the entire regiment was made up of assault mechs. It fought in Operation Thor 3027 with skill and an almost insane determination. The Archon also ordered spacecraft manufacturers to step up the construction of dropships, particularly the Fortress class. 20 of these ships built during the 6-year build-up never served with any regiment and disappeared from the records until after the war began. Though the improvements to the LCAF might seem obvious and only common sense now in retrospect, they were regarded as radical by many within the Lyran military at the time. Traditionalists, those who would oppose these changes had many reasons to disagree with the Archon and her new ways, but one of the most prevalent was the fear among mech warriors that the changes would lessen their importance and their prestige. Convincing the Archon. Shortly after the treaty between the Federated Suns and the Lyran Commonwealth was signed, Prince Hansa began discussing his military ambitions with the Archon. At first, there was no urgency in his musings, which emerged in chats carried through Comstar links. After 3025, a change came over the prince. He no longer considered a joint offensive as an idle dream. He became deadly serious about embarking on a large military offensive, one that hadn't been seen in the Inner Sphere in hundreds of years. At first, the Archon was extremely reluctant. She couldn't see the wisdom of a joint offensive with the Federated Suns. The Draconis Combine had plenty of troops on the border, and the Archon was worried about an invasion of her own realm. The Archon told the prince that the Commonwealth could lend troops for a Federated Suns offensive, but was unprepared for any joint action. If the Federated Suns were willing to wait, she said, the LCAF would be strong enough to fight an offensive in 5 years. Prince Davion began sending representatives to the Archon, trying to convince her that the LCAF was already strong enough, but she refused to be swayed. The Lyran Intelligence Corps and the generals of the LCAF gave the Archon a reason to reconsider her decision, however. In early 3026, the LIC reported a surge of discontent in the Razelhag district of the Draconis Combine. A new underground had formed. Naming themselves the Tyr, after the Norse god of war and justice, the movement engineered the assassinations of several important officials, including Prefect Mahar Lowell of Kirchenbach. Tyr members also organised a sudden upsurge of demonstrations and strikes, and for House Kurita, the district governor of Razelhag, the change was frightening. The LIC detected no response from Luthien to House Kurita's request for troops. Lyran analysts believed that Mies had been overstating the unrest in his district for years, and Luthien didn't believe his cries of alarm anymore. Even the commanders of his own regiments in his district, those who knew how bad things were getting, were just ignoring his pleas for assistance. The LIC and the military intelligence section of the LCAF took full advantage of this situation by infiltrating the district with operatives. Lyran agents would establish contact with the Tyr, and sympathetic Lyran traders were smuggling weapons to the dissidents by 3027. Tyr members slipped from the Combine to the Commonwealth to be trained by the Loki, the LIC's unconventional warfare specialists. At this time, the LIC noticed that the DCMS troops bordering the Commonwealth had started to commit a common but deadly error. They'd fallen into routine. Regiments up and down the border began issuing passes, organising leave, receiving supplies, and having their meals according to a rigorous and well-known schedule. If this was done to prevent troops from aggravating the political unrest in the district is uncertain, but it gave the Commonwealth a weapon against the forces of House Kurita. The most foolish of these routines was the border-wide adoption of the July replacement schedule. In July, all regiments discharged their retirees, made transfers, and received replacements. They also ordered supplies from the procurement department. Supplies ordered in July would arrive in September. In August, every Combine regiment had green troops and supplies were at their lowest level. The LCAF correctly assumed that this lack of trained personnel and low supplies would mar the performance of these regiments. Graduates from the acclaimed Sunjang Academy were sent to Draconis training regiments on the front line for 9 months of combat experience, and the survivors would go on to elite mech-warrior regiments. This 9-month cycle of new students and graduates, along with the rigid regimental routine, made border strengths extremely seasonal. When Archon Steiner saw these reports, she began to believe that perhaps the Commonwealth could launch an offensive. She communicated her change of heart to the prince, who greeted the news by saying, "Today is the dawning of a new age, an age where the free and moral stand up to the dark and tyrannical." Operation Götterdämmerung. Operation Götterdämmerung, designed by the High Command of the LCAF with many ideas coming directly from the Archon, was very different from Hansa Davion's Operation Rat. Götterdämmerung was an effort to push the enemy back on a broad front instead of a deep strike invasion designed to split the enemy. The Commonwealth also faced more and better mech regiments than the AFFS. The LCAF attempted a more difficult offensive against a better opponent than the Federated Sons, and that the offensive succeeded as well as it did is a testament to the Commonwealth's strength. The operation presented two obvious problems. Such a broad front would create a logistics nightmare. It also would spread the LCAF so thin that an enemy counterattack would have many undefended worlds open to plunder in the event of a breakthrough. Despite the obstacles and dangers, the LCAF was confident because the goals of the operation were more modest than Davion's offensive. The only real objective of the Commonwealth offensive was to challenge as many Combine regiments as possible. Seizing worlds was considered secondary. The objective of the Lyran offensive was modest because it was designed to cover the rear of the Federated Sons rather than achieve major gains of its own. In order to launch its devastating offensive against the Capellan Confederation, the AFFS was forced to strip troops away from its border with the Draconis Combine, leaving it dangerously vulnerable to an invasion by the DCMS. A moderately successful campaign by the Lyran Commonwealth against the Combine, however, would force the Coordinator to commit its reserves to the Commonwealth front, making a Combine offensive against Davion highly unlikely. For its offensive against the Combine, the LCAF removed some regiments from the border with the Free Worlds League, and though this worried many generals, particularly those charged with defending the Commonwealth against the League, the Archon and her highest advisors felt that Marek's internal political troubles would keep the border manageable. The Archon and her generals, in setting goals for Operation Götterdämmerung, felt that the offensive would be a success if, by the year's end, the LCAF had gained 10 worlds and had dealt out more punishment than it received. The plan succeeded beyond their dreams. General Steiner was chosen to command the operation. Her regional commanders were General Jerry Troker, Margrave of Trelshire Theatre, Commandant General Mitch Felspar, Assistant Margrave of Tamar Theatre, and General Jack Svire, Margrave of Ride Theatre. As well as acting as regional commanders, the three Margraves were expected to command troubled sections of the front personally. On the 20th of August, as Prince Davion was toasting the Archon designate and jump ships of the Federated Sons were appearing in the Capellan Confederation, General Steiner was musing silently over a battle computer at her HQ on Tamar. It showed her that 272 Commonwealth jump ships with 1,092 drop ships carrying 33 battlement regiments and 622 other regiments had successfully made the jump into 23 enemy star systems.